A little set of Gomer goggles, a little Gomer scarf, and a little Gomer mic that he was using. Well, as I went up into the vertical, I had more thrust, okay? It still didn't dawn on me that I knew he surprised me, but I didn't know who this was yet, and I didn't know what his capabilities were.
Unfortunately for Commander Cunningham, he'd crossed swords with the legendary North Vietnamese double ace Colonel Toon, who had no less than 13 American kills to his credit. The aerial combat that followed has since come to be regarded as one of the longest and most complex dogfights in aviation history. Each pilot flew his plane to the very edge of its flight envelope as the battle careened across the Asian skies. The tiny, quick-turning MiG against the heavy but more powerful Phantom. Attack and counterattack, engagement and disengagement, like a huge and deadly 3D chess game. But just when it began to seem as if the fight would last forever, Colonel Toon made his first and last mistake. For the briefest of moments, the outwitted Vietnamese ace was vulnerable.
Every emotion you've ever felt in your life, love, hate, fear, pain, anger, magnify it 1,000 times. And that's the feeling that you go through. It's emotionally and physically draining. You know that one of you, when you engage, is not going to come back. When you know that you have survived that, it's almost like being reborn.
It's a fast, harsh, gut-wrenching battle in a huge arena, very quick. I've seen the sky full of Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts in 1 second. 5 seconds, 10 seconds later, they're all gone. There's not a plane to be seen anywhere except the one you're behind, or it might be behind you. Modern combat is the same. Sometimes a battle will last a little longer because of the circumstance. Your position, his position, where you are, what you're doing. Mostly it's over in a matter of seconds.
You have to know the absolute limit of your physical being and of your machine. And the idea is that you ride on the perfect edge, the balance of disaster and the balance of winning.
Commander Cunningham later went on to become an instructor at the Top Gun school that had taught him so well. The philosophy behind Top Gun and its Air Force equivalent Red Flag is to teach pilots how to fight a wide range of potential adversaries. Not surprisingly, each of the aircraft on this busy flight line emulates the capabilities of a different Soviet fighter. The Top Gun motto is, fight like you train and train like you fight. But one of the ironies of Top Gun's success is that the instructors flying low-technology A-4 and F-5 aircraft day in and day out are beating, or to use the jargon, waxing the students in the high-tech F-14s with embarrassing regularity. Indeed, as the Red Baron is reported to have said, it's not the crate, but the man sitting in it that counts. For many, the lesson is a simple one. Invest in lots of pilots and invest in training them in lots of lower-tech aircraft. This message has been acknowledged by the Pentagon, but not yet adopted by the admirals and generals who, it seems, would rather their fighter pilots be equipped with the best machines that money can buy.
Here's what happens. You have an airplane that's very sophisticated, costs a lot of money. Therefore, you can't build very many of them because we do have a fixed budget. Every year it's fixed. So we say, well, we can procure X number of airplanes. Well, if we can only have that number, then we've got to have the very best money can buy because Americans have always been willing to trade treasure for blood. So we're going to make that a very sophisticated airplane, and we're going to give that guy the capability to do everything. It's going to be able to get all kinds of information, and he's going to be able to do all kinds of things with it. As a result, because we can't have as many airplanes, we have to give it more capability, so he has to do more, the pilot has to do more, and as a result, he gets overloaded, and in my opinion, is going to get shot down while he's trying to figure out what he's doing.
Nowadays, that logic also confronts the pilot with his own physical limitations. Turning corners in an airplane at speed produces G's, the forces that mimic gravity. G forces have been a factor in aerial combat since World War I. But today's fighters are so fast and so maneuverable that the high Gs they inflict on the pilot's body and brain can seriously impair his flying ability. Commander Charles Heater Heatley describes the sensation of Gs.
It feels like a great weight pressing down on you. The more you pull back on the stick, the harder it presses down. And what you feel is the oxygen mask pressing on your nose. You feel the skin coming down on your face. Sweat from your brow just seems to come down in currents in front of your eyes. As soon as it pops out of your forehead, it goes straight down in front of your eyes. And you can feel your lungs being pressed on your diaphragm, and you just sort of scrunch into the seat. And in fact, I notice after a first couple turns in an ACM engagement, I can raise my seat a little bit and get a little more height in the cockpit, because what was normal is now a couple inches less than normal.
But there is far more to Gs than discomfort or being able to change your seating position. With the power available to today's fighter pilot, he can turn and turn until he runs out of gas, and sustaining high Gs for more than a second or two brings other less welcome physiological effects.
You start to see dots out here, and it starts to close in, and color goes away. So when things start turning into black and white, you start letting loose of the stick. And if you keep pulling, you get what's called tunnel vision. You can only see an area about this big. And if you continue to pull, everything goes black. And when it goes black, you can still hear the radio, you still know you're flying, you still know you're in an airplane, and it is now time to unload and get the blood back in your head. If you don't get back off the stick, pretty soon, not only will you lose your vision, you'll lose consciousness, and then you have G-induced loss of consciousness.
If it were possible to see inside a pilot's brain when he is subject to high Gs, we would see that the principal problem was one of oxygen starvation. Like other cells in his body, brain cells need oxygen. Oxygen-rich blood is pumped by the heart into the exquisitely fine circuitry of the cerebrovascular system. But when exposed to high Gs, that blood begins to weigh more. At about 4 or 5 times the force of gravity, the heart's pumping action ceases to be effective, and the blood pressure in the head falls to 0. This denies the brain cells the oxygen that's vital to their continued activity. And within 3 seconds, they stop functioning and the pilot lapses into unconsciousness.
The big problem is that most people, especially in single-seat fighters, don't know they've had the event. They just feel a little bit dizzy or whatever. Nowadays, the F-16, which is behind me, and the F-15 and others have videotapes, and it records the whole flight out there. So now, because the information is better, even though you're in a single-seat fighter, we can play the videos back and say, holy cow, I was asleep during this period of time.
For the video you're about to see, holy cow would be an understatement. Were it not for the fact that this recording, specially cleared for NOVA, was acquired during a training mission in a 2-seater aircraft, the following sequence, the aircraft it was recorded in, and the pilot flying the plane, would not be around today. In this first frame of the recording, we see the New Mexico desert from a height of 24,000 feet, shown on the right vertical scale. The speed is displayed on the left vertical and shows 420 knots. The G rating is displayed as a figure at the top of the left-hand scale. For the moment, while the plane is in a gentle left-hand turn, it reads 1.2 G. The air combat instructor, sitting in the back seat, identifies an intruding aircraft at right 130.
Right 130.
The pilot commences a fast, hard pull further to the left. It's a 7G pull, and it hurts. That last groan has since been analyzed as the moment when the student pilot lost consciousness. But the instructor in the back seat doesn't know that yet. All he sees is the desert floor rushing towards him. He decides to call the pilot's attention to the fact.
Down here like a son of a
The G reading is now back to normal, around 1G, and the pilot is recovering, but not quickly enough. The cool instructor offers some more advice.
altitude. Altitude, recover.
The plane is now doing nearly 500 knots straight down towards the sun-baked rocks below. Realizing at last what's happened, the instructor pulls the aircraft out of its lethal dive and finds time to give vent to his feelings.
Damn it!
It's now estimated that over 20 pilots have died in the last 5 years as a result of accidents due to losing consciousness under the excessive G-forces of the new super agile fighters. Here at Brooks Air Force Base, a comprehensive research program is being conducted in the centrifuge to establish the exact nature of the way the body responds to Gs and the full extent of the pilot's incapacitation. What they've discovered is that many of today's fighters can subject the pilot to up to 9 or 10 times the force of gravity so quickly that the usual experiences of graying out and tunnel vision are effectively bypassed, and he will fade straight into unconsciousness. But a further sinister sting in the tail of G loss of consciousness is that if he's lucky enough to wake up at all, its effects are by no means over.
When you have a loss of consciousness, basically the blood pressure in the brain goes to 0, and after a few seconds, it basically takes a nap. And you go through this, what we call an absolute incapacitation period of time. During this time, your mind is elsewhere. It's in a dreamlike world. You could be on the planet Mars or whatever. As the blood gets back into the brain and all those centers start working again, you start waking up and you realize that you are again a human being, that you're in an airplane. In fact, you're piloting, and all of a sudden you look out in front and there's some trees in front of you and pull on a stick and you save your life. Now, in peacetime, for a military pilot, that's about all he really needs, because the only real threat out there is hitting the ground. The problem is, for military aviation, is the wartime consequences of a GLC. Not only do you go through the 12 seconds of absolute incapacitation and then this 12 seconds of waking up into this dreamlike state, the problem is your higher learning centers, your cognitive skills, the skills that we as fighter pilots learn, that's flying, dogfighting, and dropping bombs, they don't start working for at least 2 minutes, and sometimes as long as 4 minutes. In the air-to-air business, which I'm most familiar with, it can be very serious, because you can imagine you're flying along in a 2-ship package out there, and your wingman looks over his shoulder and sees an attacking aircraft, so immediately calls the section or the 2-ship to brake, let's say in this case a right turn. So immediately you go into a hard right turn, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 Gs, whatever's required, and if your attention is over your shoulder looking back trying to find the guy that's trying to kill you out there, in about 5 or 6 seconds, if you're not doing anything to elevate your pressure upstairs, you're going to be taking a nap. And what happens there then, instead of pulling 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 Gs, whatever required, the aircraft eases off, and now you become a 1G strafe target, and the guy can just go right in there and literally gun your brains out, and you're going to die.
Traditionally, the inappropriately named G suit, which is actually an inflatable corset with legs, has offered some measure of support to the pilot by squeezing his legs and stomach to prevent his blood from pooling in his feet. But even at their best, these suits only offer an extra G or so of enhanced tolerance. And in the viciously maneuverable F-16, that just isn't enough. In the face of this awesome power, and for the first time ever in fighter aviation, pilots assigned to F-16 squadrons are now required to be G-rated in the centrifuge and are taught what is known as the energy straining maneuver.
Subject is ready. Brake. Brake is activated. Pressure.
Pilots and doctors alike coyly describe this exercise as exactly like straining on the toilet when you're constipated. This may be faintly embarrassing, acutely uncomfortable, and when performed on the ground at 1G, very dangerous. But in high G maneuvers, it can win an extra 3 Gs of tolerance for the pilot.
Our whole purpose is to give them the confidence and the knowledge that they can operate at the higher G levels without taking a nap and maybe having a bad day.
Hello. Hello.
Repeat.
Hello.
In an effort to further reduce the stresses on the pilot, this highly computerized version